Hey, everybody, welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bello, and today's episode is going to be about creating processes and checklists. Basically, it's going to be a throwback to when I worked in corporate America because this is something that I actually need for my own business right now. I mentioned before that I have a coach at my brokerage office for real estate, and he actually has been telling me for months now to create checklists for everything. Every time we would have our 2-week meeting and check-in, he'd be like, how's your checklists coming along? And I'd be like, I didn't do them because I have everything here in my mind, right? I'm a go-getter. I have a lot of ideas. I get sticky notes everywhere. I write things down. I write it all over my whiteboard, and it's very easy to think of a million different things to do, but then get very scattered. So it's very important to be able to write things down in a certain spot and have an actual game plan so you are able to move forward in a way that makes sense. So you want to be able to create processes and checklists for basically everything. And again, my coach told me literally have one for my morning routine, my weekly routine, my monthly routine, when I get a new client, when I have a buyer client, when I have a seller client, even when I'm recording my podcast, create a checklist. And the one for my podcast was pretty easy. It was like 4 or 5 bullet points, like think of the podcast topic, schedule time to record the podcast, actually record the podcast, send the podcast to my virtual assistant to edit the file, schedule the podcast for posting, as well as that one step of adding the title and the header, the title and the body and all the other details and the tags that are required for the search engine optimization. So there's a lot of steps that happen, but it really is pretty simple overall. And the importance of checklists are that you can outsource and you can even hire people on. If I have everything here in my mind, it's difficult to tell people everything that I do for my podcast, for my real estate business. If I've got checklists and I can hand someone a binder of checklists that I do for every single step of my real estate business, I can easily hand that off or delegate it to somebody or even outsource it to somebody else. And you want to follow them and update them as needed. So ideally, with each time you do a repetitive task, you want to be able to pull this checklist out and actually follow it and check boxes off to make sure you don't miss anything. This will help you solidify and identify wasteful activities as well. When I was creating my checklists for everything that I'm working on right now, I wrote down things that I'm doing now in my business, and I found 2 or 3 things that are kind of a waste. I don't really have to do this extra step. Or when I wrote it down, I realized this is an easy, perfect situation for me to be able to outsource this to someone in my office or even my virtual assistant, John, who is the man and is editing this podcast. Thank you, John. And again, I mentioned that this enables you to hire or outsource the tasks. If you try to hire somebody or outsource something without having checklists and processes documented, they're going to be basically asking you for those documents because they don't know what to do otherwise. They can't read your mind and they don't know what it is that you expect them to do. So the easiest way to do it is to give them a checklist, 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps, whatever it is for the task at hand. And to take it a step further, if you can record a video of you explaining it or even doing a screen share using a free tool like OBS, I forget what it stands for, but if you look up OBS, broadcast software, something like that, you'll be able to find free software to record your screen, and you can make videos to share with people on your team, virtual assistants, etc. And then you want to make sure, again, not to keep all of the stuff in your head. A lot of us get caught up in thinking of a random idea and we think it's great and we follow it for a day and we get very excited. We spend 8 hours working on it. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you can probably relate and you're probably chuckling along with me. We've all had that thing like, oh, this is the perfect idea. You spend 8 hours on that thing. Next day, you do the same thing but with a different idea. And then a week later, both of those ideas are just saved on a Google Drive folder on your computer or on a folder on your computer itself, and you haven't really done anything with it, right? So I did this, for example. I made a whole 10 steps to buy a house or home buyer ultimate guide, and I wanted to use it as a lead magnet, and I built the whole thing out. I think what was stopping me or slowing me down was that it's just on a Google Doc file, so it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't have any great graphics, and I'm thinking I want to outsource that on some site like Upwork.com so they can make it more presentable and make it more of a professional format and look. So that was the only thing that was slowing me down. But ultimately, it was great content as is, and the layout was clean. So I could use that as is as a lead magnet to market to people on Facebook or wherever that I do advertisements on to gain new buyers who want that free guide and are interested in learning the steps that you need to know to buy a house in my market. So you want to do it, test it, get feedback. Whenever you do a process handoff, you want to make sure to optimize it. So ideally, and this is what I used to do in the corporate world as well, I would create a process. I would actually look at different files and reports, and maybe they had a certain problem that they were trying to accomplish or find the solution to. In my role, when I was in a 6-month rotation, I was in a rotation program where I would rotate around different departments and help them with their problems. My role was to identify a few problems that they had, or they would give me a few problems that they need help with. And basically, I would find the right reports in the ERP or enterprise resource planning software. They use a software called SAP. I would find the reports that I need, spit out hundreds and thousands of lines of data for a certain time period. I could run charts and do all of these fancy things to paint a picture of what has happened with a certain thing, like costs or lead times, various variables that I was measuring and able to track. And then during my 6-month stint, I had to show that how I implemented a few processes and how that impacted the bottom line or saved on lead time or saved us with air freight, various things like that. So the important part here was that I couldn't just fix things and then leave, because after 6 months, if I fixed something and left, it would just build back to whatever it was or break again. I had to create a process. I had to create a checklist. I remember we would create stuff called standard operating procedures, and there was a process. Once it was approved, it had different people. You had to include all the different people who are accountable, who are responsible for various tasks, what role does a certain thing, and then they hand it off to somebody else. If you've ever seen a process flow chart, this is very similar. We're on, like on one side, they may have, all the different departments, accounting, purchase manager, maybe finance, and then you have the different roles. And then in that, I think it's called a swim lane. Basically, in that swim lane, you have all the tasks that that person does. So maybe the purchasing manager makes their person, their buyers, cut a PO for certain parts. And then the finance guy has to approve it if it's above a certain dollar amount. Or maybe the VP has to say, yes, this is okay. This is an acceptable expense. And then it goes on to the next person. And then maybe accounting has to do something with that at the end and run some kind of report at the end of the month or the end of the quarter and so on. But you have to create standard operating procedures, and I had to train people on that. So once I would develop the process, create reports, I would literally step by step have some screenshots, have some checklists, and say, open up SAP, type in this T code or transaction code. It's crazy how I remember this stuff. It's been like four years since I've really looked at that in detail. But you type in this transaction code or T code, you open up this report, you look from the last month to this month, 1 month period, run the report, export it, put it into Excel, do this to column C, filter it in this certain way, copy that, paste it into this other template, and it spits out a certain report that you can track over time because you're consistent and you're doing the same thing. Now, whenever you have a couple of steps like that, if you're trying to do it off of memory and you're doing a report that's once a month, you're going to miss a step, you're going to forget to sort something or filter something, and it's not going to be good data because you're not going to be doing apples to apples. So you want to make sure that you have a routine. If you're doing any routine tasks, if it's complex at all, if it's consistent, those are all things that you can easily just document and then outsource to someone else. And again, like I mentioned earlier, a flow chart really helps. Maybe even just get it on a whiteboard and bring all the subject matter experts in your company together and ask them, hey, how does this process work? When we order a part, what is the process? Okay, this person gets approval if it's over a certain dollar amount. Then they do this in the system. Then they click this button. Then finance has to approve it or whatever. And you can get all those experts in the room so you make sure you're covering all the bases and you're not missing anything in the process. And of course, the more departments you have involved, there will be processes in each department, but overall, there's a big process that how the whole company works, right? From the top to the bottom of the organization, everything's got some kind of large flow chart, but then there's also micro flow charts depending on the division, the job title, the actual tasks. the projects, and so on. So that's basically all that I have. Creating processes and checklists allows you to scale your business, to outsource, to delegate. You really should have this stuff for everything possible, even the stuff that seems like you don't really need it because it's super simple. You've got to have systems in place for everything. And even with all the coronavirus stuff, for example, I'm sure there are companies that have checklists in place. Okay, at the restaurant, once the person leaves the table, here's the system. You grab the sanitizer, you do this, you wipe the table down, you put the sign on the next table saying that one's sanitized now, and then leave this one for 10 minutes to clear off the germs or whatever. There are processes in place because otherwise people are going to forget stuff if they're just going off of memory. And then make sure to follow yourself, follow the actual process yourself, and make sure it all makes sense, fill in any gaps that are there. And to take it a step further, it really helps if you record your screen, if you're doing something on the computer, or you make a nice little informative video that someone can watch as they go through the checklist just to make sure that they have everything down. So that's basically it. It's important to do this stuff, and I need to follow my own advice here because I keep resorting to memory and dropping the ball and forgetting. And then I want the experience to be consistent from client to client. I don't want to work with two clients and do the exact same thing, but then miss a couple steps or forget to send a certain intro email that lays out the ground rules of when I work and how I work and all of that. So if I look at my checklist, it'll tell me send intro email to client. Okay, now the client won't call me at 7 a.m. or like 10 p.m. They're going to know that my hours are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. when I make myself available. They will also know that I prefer text and email to a phone call. And if I don't answer my phone, they should send me a text, and I will text them and let them know when I can call them back. That way I take control of my schedule, I keep my sanity, and everybody's happy. Everybody gets what they need. So follow a checklist, create a process. If you don't have these things in your business or in your life, make sure to do them. And let me know what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and give me some feedback. And make sure to leave me a review in iTunes if you have not already. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any topic ideas, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'm always looking for new content to churn out for you. And with that being said, have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. Thanks so much, everybody.